Have you ever wondered what happens when family prejudice meets divine justice? Today we're exploring one of the Bible's most overlooked yet powerful stories about love, race, and God's surprising response to discrimination. Deep in the wilderness of Sinai, around 1450 BC, the Israelites are journeying toward the Promised Land. They've been freed from Egyptian slavery, witnessed incredible miracles, and received the 10 Commandments. But even among God's chosen people, human prejudices still lurk beneath the surface. At the center of our story stands Moses, the great lawgiver and prophet. He's already married to Zipporah, a Midianite woman, but now he's taken a second wife. This wasn't unusual in ancient times, especially for leaders forming political alliances. But this marriage is different. This woman is described as a Cushite, meaning she's from the region we now call Ethiopia or Sudan. She's African, with dark skin that stands out among the Hebrew people. The Hebrew word used is Cushite, and Cush in biblical geography refers to the area south of Egypt, encompassing modern-day Sudan, Ethiopia, and parts of southern Egypt. This wasn't just a cultural difference. It was a visible racial distinction that some couldn't accept. Enter Miriam and Aaron, Moses' own siblings. Miriam is a prophetess who led the women in celebration after crossing the Red Sea. Aaron is the high priest, Moses' spokesperson, and his right-hand man in leading Israel. These aren't random critics. They're family members and spiritual leaders who should know better. But prejudice doesn't respect spiritual positions or family bonds. Numbers chapter 12, verse 1 tells us, Miriam and Aaron began to talk against Moses because of his Cushite wife, for he had married a Cushite. Notice the repetition. The text emphasizes twice that she's a Cushite. This isn't accidental. The biblical writer is highlighting that race was the central issue. They weren't criticizing Moses for political reasons or spiritual concerns. They were objecting to his wife's ethnicity. But Miriam and Aaron are clever. They don't openly admit their racial prejudice. Instead, they cloak their criticism in spiritual language. Verse 2 continues, Has the Lord spoken only through Moses? Hasn't he also spoken through us? Sound familiar? This is how prejudice often works. People rarely admit their bias outright. Instead, they find seemingly legitimate reasons to justify their discrimination. Miriam and Aaron are essentially saying, Who does Moses think he is? We're prophets too. Why should we follow someone who makes such poor choices? But here's what makes this story remarkable. The very next line tells us, And the Lord heard this. God is listening. He hears not just their words, but their hearts. He knows the real motivation behind their criticism, and he's not pleased. Before we see God's response, let's understand what Moses does. Verse 3 gives us a crucial detail. Now, Moses was a very humble man, more humble than anyone else on the face of the earth. Moses doesn't defend himself. He doesn't argue with his siblings or justify his marriage. He remains silent, trusting God to handle the situation. This humility, this refusal to retaliate, makes what happens next even more powerful. Suddenly, God speaks. Not privately, not through dreams or visions, but directly and immediately. At once the Lord said to Moses, Aaron and Miriam, Come out to the tent of meeting, all three of you. This is a divine summons. God is calling a family meeting, and he's not happy. The three siblings gather at the tabernacle, the sacred tent, where God meets with his people. Then something extraordinary happens. The Lord came down in a pillar of cloud. He stood at the entrance to the tent and summoned Aaron and Miriam. God's presence manifests physically. This cloud represents his glory, his holiness, his power. When the Creator of the universe shows up personally, you know something significant is about to happen. Listen to my words, God declares. He then explains the unique relationship he has with Moses. While other prophets receive dreams and visions, Moses speaks with God face to face, clearly, and not in riddles. Moses sees the form of the Lord. Then comes God's piercing question. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? This isn't just about disrespecting Moses. It's about challenging God's choice. God chose Moses as leader. God approved of his marriage. By criticizing Moses' Cushite wife, Miriam and Aaron are essentially telling God he made a mistake. The divine anger burns hot. The anger of the Lord burned against them, and he left them. When the cloud lifts, revealing God's departure, Miriam is suddenly leprous, like snow. This isn't just any disease. Leprosy in biblical times was devastating. It meant isolation, shame, and social death. But there's bitter irony here. Miriam objected to Moses' wife because of her dark skin. Now, Miriam's own skin has turned white with disease. Aaron immediately recognizes the severity of their sin. He pleads with Moses, "Please, my Lord, I ask you not to hold against us the sin we have so foolishly committed. Do not let her be like a stillborn infant coming from its mother's womb with its flesh half eaten away." Notice Aaron's humility now. He calls Moses, "my Lord," and admits their foolishness. Pride has been replaced by desperate repentance. Moses, despite being the victim of their prejudice, immediately intercedes for his sister. So Moses cried out to the Lord, "Please, God, heal her." There's no bitterness, no desire for revenge, just compassion and love for his family. God responds, but with conditions. If her father had spit in her face, would she not have been in disgrace for 7 days? Confine her outside the camp for 7 days. After that, she can be brought back. This punishment serves multiple purposes. It demonstrates that actions have consequences, it gives time for reflection and repentance, and it shows the entire community that God takes prejudice seriously. For 7 days, the entire nation waits. 2 million people halt their journey because of one woman's racism. The whole community learns that discrimination affects everyone, not just the victims. When Miriam is finally restored and brought back into the camp, the lesson is complete. God has defended interracial marriage, punished prejudice, and demonstrated his inclusive love. But what happened to Moses' Cushite wife during all this? The text doesn't tell us, but we can imagine. She witnessed her husband's family reject her because of her race. She saw divine intervention on her behalf. She experienced God's protection and acceptance when human hearts failed. This story speaks powerfully to our modern world. Racism isn't new. Prejudice didn't start in recent centuries. It's been poisoning human relationships since ancient times. But God's response remains consistent. He opposes discrimination and defends the marginalized. The story also reveals something beautiful about Moses' character. His choice to marry across racial lines wasn't rebellion or poor judgment. It was an expression of the inclusive heart God was developing in him. The same man who would later write that all humans are made in God's image lived out that truth in his personal life. Moreover, this narrative challenges us to examine our own hearts. Like Miriam and Aaron, we might cloak our prejudices in seemingly legitimate concerns. We might use spiritual language to justify discrimination, but God sees through our excuses to our true motivations. The story of Moses' African wife reminds us that God's love transcends racial boundaries. His kingdom includes people from every nation, tribe, and tongue. When we reject others based on their ethnicity, we're not just hurting them. We're opposing God's inclusive plan for humanity. As the Israelites finally resumed their journey toward the Promised Land, they carried with them a powerful lesson about acceptance, humility, and divine justice. The woman some had rejected because of her skin color was now protected by the very voice of God. And the nation learned that in God's eyes, love knows no racial boundaries. What do you think this story teaches us about God's view on race and prejudice? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective.